So on a farm like ours, where there are 1,000 different competing priorities all the time, I made a couple of mistakes here. So these are actually greenhouse variety type cucumbers that could grow like 20 feet tall and be in the season for the whole year. But yeah, there's just like so many things to do. And when we take a look at that tunnel, which you saw earlier, it is so many people hours to keep that thing pruned and trellised, and that's the priority, because like a tunnel that big with that many tomatoes, so we do, the density in there is something like, we have something like 3,000 liters, and it is 9,000 square feet. So it's not a huge tunnel. It's 42 by 200. These are 42 by 200. They're Harnois. We purchased them in 2016. Vaster actually paid for them. This is the one thing that Vaster's kind of done for us, other than let us be here, but which was very nice of Vaster. Thank you, Vaster. If anyone from Vaster sees this, we're very appreciative. It basically allowed us, the only reason why we started doing this, investing in these high tunnels, was because I wanted to, the impetus for it was just to keep my staff employed over the winter. Because we would just, like a lot of farms, we would pretty much lay everyone off after Thanksgiving, and then many of them we would lose, maybe to another farm, or they would get onto something else and they wouldn't come back. So this actually allows us to keep 4 staff members employed half-time throughout the winter, which they wouldn't want to work for full-time anyway over the winter. They want a little bit of a break. And it allowed us to do a winter CSA, because we grow greens in this, which Ethan's going to talk a lot more about, right? You're going to talk more about, I guess. So, we'll harvest roots and things like that, and then we'll store them over the winter, and then we have nice fresh greens we'll grow. It's a little annoying for the CSA, because actually the most valuable thing to grow in here during the winter is Salanova, which is like a cut lettuce mix, or we're doing a lot of direct seeded either radishes or cut greens we were doing for like $10 a pound. But because of the CSA, we have to have a little more diversity, so we do kale, which, kale's not like per square foot, not the most valuable crop, or chard. We had a bit of chard. We had a couple bits of spinach, which like we, for the life of us, cannot sell spinach during the winter. I don't know why. I think there's a lot of competition for spinach, because spinach you can grow in an unheated tunnel. We actually heat these, so we keep these, we'll talk about it a little bit, but we did an experiment this year where we had one at 33,
yep,
and the other one at 40, and Ethan's going to talk about that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to talk about it.
Yes, sir.
So, and one of the reasons why we want to heat, I don't live here, none of us live here, we don't want to deal with row covers every day. Because with row covers, you got to take them on and off every single day, or else you start getting fungal diseases, and we don't want to deal with that. So I have some heavier row covers stored just in case heat goes out or something as a fail safe. But and also the lettuce, although the mustards were very popular too, but it just seems like the lettuce really just people wanted the lettuce because no one else had it. So kind of our goal for wholesale is like we kind of hit the shoulders. So I don't want to compete with people for salad mix during the summer. That's like a dumb thing for us. We're not going to produce a high enough quality for people. There's some farm, and us being nonprofit, I don't want to be competing with the for-profit farms for like valuable stuff like that. But so we just hit the shoulders. So cucumbers is like any cucumber that we can produce, we will sell right now. Especially because they're nice Persian varieties. So all the chefs like those. It's just, we had some issues with them establishing, and when I write something off, I don't know, like I'm kind of a bad person, because like if it's a person or if it's a crop and I write you off, I kind of like, you're just like dead to me. And I think because this was like dead to me because it didn't establish very well and it didn't look very good, I was just like, cucumbers are dead to me, and then I didn't put any more attention into them. But next year, actually, I think we'll go back to plastic. We use white plastic in all the tunnels, but the weed seed bank seemed to be so low that I was like, oh, it's gonna be fine. we're actually going to rip these out next week, even though we could still probably get a few $100s. We're selling like $600 worth of cucumbers just from these 3 rows a week. I'll probably cut it short just to reclaim the space, weed it before the weeds go to seed, and because the winter greens are so much more valuable. And then I actually do want to plant a buckwheat cover crop in here. I want to try to get a cover crop established. Next year we are going to do cucumbers, but I think what I'm going to do is there's a netting called NOFA-NY, and I think we're just going to string up the NOFA-NY, and because I'm realizing we just do not have the time to give the tomatoes the trellising attention and also these. So we'll just put the NOFA-NY, let them climb up, put down white plastic so we don't have to deal with the weeds. And it was a learning lesson, but it is good that like our market is there. So I know that we can sell it if we give it a little bit of attention. And the black plastic, so this is a silage tarp. We were using it a lot in the fields to germinate weeds, specifically for like carrots and things. But I actually, it's kind of annoying because when it gets rained on, the rain stays on it and then you got to pull it off. So the way people use these silage tarps, this is kind of a thing. They will, and who's that gentleman who did all that research?
Ryan Marr at Cornell, with the Small Farms program.
So he wrote all this up if anyone's interested. How do you spell his last name?
Maher.
So they did a lot of research with silage tarps and nutrient management and weeds. But basically people are using the silage tarps to cover the ground. So you make your beds, you fertilize, you do all the things. You throw the silage tarps down, and then you wait about 2 weeks-ish. We kind of found 2 weeks was enough for weeds to germinate and die underneath it, and then you pull it off, and you have a perfect. But for us, stale seed bedding is so effective that it's not really worth dealing with the tarps. That's what we found. But in the tunnels, it's awesome because you can. So we watered very heavily. We actually did that like 4 inches of water just to flush some stuff out, and there was actually a lot of crop there, a lot of crop residue. We watered super heavy, did a nice flush, threw the tarps on, and actually, I don't remember how long ago we did it, but maybe like 3 weeks. And there's very little left. There's actually very little residue left. My God. Everything that's left, we'll just rake right out. And you got this beautiful soil structure.
Yeah. So you won't do any tillage?
Yeah, so we're totally no-till in here.
Okay.
Let's go outside, it's so hot in here.
You lay the plastic with your tractor?
No tractors go in here. We are completely no-till.
You broad fork.
We broad fork, so I guess it's not completely no-till, but I don't even know if we're going to broad fork anymore.
And just shovel dirt on? Is that...
Yeah, it's really quick.
Okay.
No tractors go in here, although I did design this system for tractors to go in, so I'm not sure if you can tell, but so this is like custom end walls. So we have this company called Happy Construction out in Pennsylvania. They designed it for us. So these inner walls do that, and then we can close these doors up, and these are actually doors, and there's a hinge here. So these doors hinge out. It's so windy, I don't want to open it, but they hinge out, so we can actually get every inch of the tunnel. So we can take tractors through, but we really like no-till, especially in a tunnel. With a tractor, you're bound to hit something. You're bound to hit this. You're bound to hit that. You're bound to hit this. You get compaction. If you don't have this situation to be able to get in, you have to like drive in, back up. You drive over all your beds. You end up, in the beginning, you usually have a lot of compaction, so stuff doesn't grow very well there. It doesn't take us that long to either cover. We don't always cover. The covering only really works when it's warm out. When it's cold, they can be under those tarps forever and they will not break down. So during the winter, we have a little bit more people power, or like early spring, we have a little more people power. So we'll just either hoe it and then rake it out, or we'll just pull the plants up, get it out, and then we'll right away plant something else. So because our soil is so sandy, as I talked about earlier, we actually, in our high tunnels, we started putting peat moss as our organic matter. The peat moss really, peat moss is so broken down already, it's basically just like humus that it doesn't really, it doesn't provide much nutrients for soil microbes because it's already so decomposed, which is unfortunate. And I've shied away from compost so much because compost, you can bring in all sorts of crap into your tunnel with compost, whether it be weed seeds or like excessive salts, all these kind of things. But I'm actually kind of starting to question a little bit, maybe sort of the no compost at all is like a little extreme. Maybe if we can find a really high quality compost, maybe we would put some in here. Just to provide a little more nutrients for microbes. And especially because we do remove a lot of the residue, although the roots stay in the ground, but still, it's not a ton. But we also don't till that much, so maybe we're not burning up that much. So anyway, just in terms of, and those are the bales of peat moss that we use. We just buy them from Nolts. They're like $10 or $11. They're like $10 a bale. We'll put 30 bales in a tunnel one time a year.
Have you been testing the soil and noticed?
Oh yeah, within like a season we saw like a % increase.
What type of basil is that?
This is new variety called Everleaf, which I'm not sure I love it.
It's cute.
Yeah, they say
But
it's
how do you
supposed to
pick it?
be.
You're supposed to pick it as like just the tips.
I don't know. They say it was supposed to be like better than the Eleonora for basal downy mildew
Really?
disease, but
Yeah.
they also, I think a lot of people, well, not a lot. I think some people are moving toward buying really cheap seed and direct seeding it, and getting just a micro cut, and then because the baby stuff isn't as susceptible to the downy mildew, and you can just have many generations of it, and then you can just boom. Just don't let your plants get mature anymore. So anyway, whatever. But so our soil fertility plan in here is we do the 30 bales of peat moss once a year. Maybe we'll consider putting in some compost, moderation of very, very high quality one, not like a crap from Joe Schmo down the road, or probably not even ours, because we can't really manage it that well. But Vermont, like a Vermont compost, but that's like crazy expensive, but maybe it makes sense. And so yeah, anyway, we have permanent beds. So do you see these metal stakes? The metal, so our beds are actually 4 feet wide, and then we have an 18-inch path. So those stakes, that's what designates the bed. They stay that way forever. They never change. We broad fork the beds. We'll get better shots in the next tunnel. just cut all this out. So yeah, so you can see really clearly. So these we just pound in these conduits. We run a line all the way down. So that way, when I have my crew broad fork, although I like broad forking too, it's a fun thing, especially the extra weight makes it a little bit easier. Broad fork, and I basically have them like put the tine right up to the string. So I had a teacher once who told me who his thing was like, if you take care of the outsides and the edges, the middle takes care of itself. So just really making sure to like make a nice delineation on the bed, because when we're direct seeding, we want that bed top to be perfectly beautiful. So we broad fork, and then we generally, for the high tunnel, I haven't been using our normal custom blend, which I described earlier. We're using like feather meal. It kind of depends on the crop that we're throwing in there, but say for the tomatoes, we were putting like, I have it written down, I can't tell you exactly, but how much, but feather meal. We were putting some humates in there, definitely sulfate of potash, a little bit of gypsum, although I know we're getting calcium from our water, but still a little bit of gypsum, and that peat moss. I think that's pretty much all we were putting in there. Occasionally we'll throw in some azomite, which is kind of like a multivitamin for your soil. Broad fork, and then we'll just kind of rake it in lightly, and then that's it. And then we'll lay plastic, and then we'll either, if we don't lay plastic, we'll direct seed greens into it. That's why the weed management is so critical. That's why I'm willing to sacrifice the money that we could get from the cucumbers, although that's going to start pittering out. I mean, some people are going to start having cucumbers now, and there's going to be a lot more competition. I'd rather lose, a couple $1,500 in cucumbers and not have that weed nightmare than just let it go, because it'll, off one bed of like Salanova, if we harvest it 2 or 3 times, that's like, we once calculated it was like $5,000 from one first cut of Salanova. So it's a lot of money. You can do, winter greens are very valuable, but don't do it. It's really not worth it.
We got a SARE partnership grant this past year to look at the interaction between temperature, minimum heating over the winter, and nitrogen availability, specifically nitrate availability, over the course of the winter, and its impact on yield and quality of the final product. And so I think Leon mentioned earlier, we had one tunnel set at 33 degrees as the minimum threshold, just on the thermostat, and this one set at 40 degrees, and we had Salanova, spinach, and kale that were all planted on the same dates that we tracked over the course of the winter. We did tissue testing to look at the nitrogen concentration in those leaves, as well as nitrate availability test in the soil on a weekly basis to see how that fluctuated over time, and then looked at yield. And I think the take-home messages that I got out of it were, one, is it specifically to Salanova, if you're looking at like a mid-fall transplanted Salanova and you had a full house of it, I think you can definitely justify cranking the temperature up a little bit. We got basically 3 cuts out of the Salanova in the house that was kept warmer with that 40 degree minimum threshold, in the same time that we got 2 cuts out of the tunnel that was kept at that 33 degree threshold. So if that really is your gross off a planting of Salanova and you can get an extra cut out of it, I think that could be an opportunity to use heat. We didn't see that kind of difference in kale or spinach, which you would probably anticipate because they're more cold hardy and not as high valued crops as well over the winter.
And the reason for the extra cut was that they all want to bolt starting basically in February, so that extra heat just pushed it just long enough where we're actually able to get that third cut before it wanted to start bolting. Although quality goes down, and the other thing that we kind of found is if you have, I had a lot of probably botrytis.
Well, yeah. I think one of the things that you've been talking about in relation to high tunnel management has been the rotational difficulty, which is kind of the cornerstone of organic production.
Yeah.
Which is if you have that much money sunk into this infrastructure, how can you get the kind of return out of the crop that you're planting in there to justify every square foot of this space that isn't tomatoes? And so a 2-year rotation, if you did that in the field, everyone would be like, really, Leon? You're doing that? But in a high tunnel, no one bats an eye. It's like, of course you're going on a 2-year rotation.
I mean, a 2-year rotation is like generous. Most people just do tomatoes year after year after year.
Yeah, continuous tomatoes, absolutely. So you didn't even have an extreme botrytis gray mold problem in your tomatoes, but it was present. And I think what happened then is, if you look at some of these soil-borne pathogens that have a much broader host range, things like Pythium, things like Rhizoctonia, you keep temperature levels up where they can still be active even if it's at low levels. I think what we really saw is kind of some root damage from Pythium and Rhizoctonia in that Salanova, and then after first cut you had botrytis in the environment on a weakened plant already, and you lost a lot of the heads to crown rot from botrytis as a result. So there was that as well. Now, was that temperature related? Maybe, but you had tomatoes in that tunnel where you had much more severe botrytis pressure, which I think was mostly a secondary in this case, like I said, after the Pythium and Rhizoctonia already weakened the plants. So there are rotational challenges. There are also nutritional challenges. I mean, I think that what you're doing in terms of fertility management, these tunnels, makes a lot of sense for high tunnels. But I think, again, looking at the difference between what you're doing in the field versus here, I mean, there's some stark contrast to be drawn.
No cover crops generally.
Yeah, no legume cover crops. I mean, your nitrogen source, and this is where the question about what is sustainable nutrient management in a high tunnel situation look like? How does it differ from field fertility management from a sustainable perspective? Is there a role for Chilean nitrate in a system like this? And what we saw, again, with one fertigation of a fairly low rate of Chilean nitrate coming into the spring, 5 pounds for the whole tunnel of 20%, was it 20% N?
think
Is that
Chilean
the-
is 15.
I think you.
It's 15
18,
to.
I don't remember what your formulation was.
It's 15.
All the
It's
formulations
15.
are a little different. But it came out to something like 7 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And I mean, we saw, I think it was a 1% increase in the nitrogen concentration in that foliar sample after a week coming out of that fertigation. So the question becomes, do you front load the equivalent of 600 pounds of nitrogen per acre of feather meal in the fall because it's going to be very slow to mineralize
Which
under
is not
colder
what we
weather?
did.
What's that?
Not what we did.
Not what you did,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there are organic
People
farms
doing
out
that.
there
Yeah.
that are claiming that's what they need to do.
We
to
put
get
like
the nitrogen
70
response.
pounds. We put 70 pounds of N in the fall.
Yeah. Or do you just nurse that crop along with a form of nitrogen that doesn't need to be mineralized because it can't mineralize under those cold weather conditions,
Yeah.
and not have just that huge environmental impact of all that nitrogen being loaded into a system? It's something that, you know, we're just starting to get some information about the impacts and the interactions of all of these things. And the other thing that you mentioned earlier that we did see as it relates to irrigation management is the nitrogen availability in the fall was much higher right off the bat in the tunnel that had crop growing in it up until that point, whereas you basically had an unirrigated desert on your hands in the other one.
Yeah,
and
we were curing onions in here,
Yeah,
and it was bone dry.
it took a number of weeks to see that response to the nitrogen, which again, the theory there with no real hard data to back that up, but to infer that you had decimated your soil microbial population by not giving it any water, any living roots, any nutrition to survive on for that period of months leading up to the winter greens. And so it took longer to then start mineralizing that pool of nitrogen that was there.
Yeah.
So those are some of the take-home messages from
Yeah.
that research.
I have a question because I'm not a farmer, and so I don't consider the profitability, but I'm now hearing potentially the profitability of the hoop houses is such that leaving it to a crop of cover cropping is not going to be economic. Is that the reason that cover cropping is just not economical enough?
I mean, I think it depends. I mean, I think that it doesn't take long to recoup the infrastructure costs. Like I haven't actually done the math yet to see how long it would take, but I would be surprised if it was more than 5 years. I mean, I bet you it's probably more than 3 years. I mean, if we were to sell all the tomatoes in here that we were probably going to yield this year at like $2 a pound, I think we could. I think at one point I got a number of like $50,000. So each tunnel cost $100,000. I mean, obviously that 50 grand has to cover all the labor that goes into this, which is a ton of work and a ton of people hours. So it's not like 50 grand is profit, but yeah, I'd be surprised if it was more than 5 years of a return between the winter greens and the tomatoes. And then, so if you had that money, I mean, even if you took a loan, not that I've had to take a loan, so I shouldn't talk like intelligently about this, but I mean, I took a loan for my mortgage, but you know, I don't own this farm, so I can talk theoretical about it. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a smart investment, and particularly if you can keep your employees from year after year. I mean, that's the take home for me. It's like, yes, we earn money off these high tunnels, but just keeping my employees,
And keeping
that
your
is
customers as
invaluable.
well.
And my
Yeah.
customers, yeah. I mean, yeah, we've actually just from our, not only our CSA members, so we're able to provide food for our CSA community for basically 40 weeks out of the year. Basically it goes, so April and basically 6 weeks. So if they do, we offer this early share in May called May Share. So other than 6 weeks, we could basically provide food for them. And then our wholesale, we never had a break in wholesale. So, I feel like this spring, we just had really loyal wholesale customers, and we do it through this company called Farms to Tables. So we don't even have a relationship with the people that we're selling to. Farms to Tables manages the whole thing, and these folks are still really loyal to us, and buy week after week. And I think last year when we had breaks, we weren't seeing that. We would see like it took a while for people to remember us again before they started buying. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of, but I will say that I think if you're going to really seriously get into high tunnel production, it is really hard. I mean, I don't know if I would consider the ground to ground thing again. So this is called a ground to ground tunnel. If we had the money, I would have maybe thought more about multi-bay. So multi-bay has a shared wall, and they're more cost effective because, they cost more in general, but they're more, you share a wall, so it's a little bit less steel. So you can get a multi-bay. And they have a little bit more air mass too. So the more air mass you have in here, the cheaper it is to heat during the winter. And I really like heating in the winter to 33. I think we're going to stick with 33 degrees. Although I would not hesitate if we had a really healthy looking crop of Salanova. I would not hesitate to try to punch up the heat, and like I wouldn't have the heat go on in December, but I would consider like late January punching up the heat a little bit just to try to get that third cut. But only if we had a healthy looking crop. And then that was a take home for me. And the one reason why I didn't go with the multi-bay is because they, when the multi-bays, when they meet, they usually have this like little valley in the middle. And I always thought that you always had to heat your high tunnels, because if you have a multi-bay, because the snow because you have to melt the snow. But actually I found out there's companies like Nexus greenhouses that they make a multi-bay where you don't have to do that. It's like structurally sound enough to be able to handle the snow load. So I don't know. With that said, we'll probably get a third of the same. Although if we could afford a multi-bay, I might get a multi-bay in this space.
Can you talk a bit, like when we were talking about this field day, we were talking about doing season extension and making the high tunnel decision versus lots of little, low tunnels and hoops and stuff. Like, can you talk about how you made that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I feel every farmer has to make their own decision. I mean, most of us don't have like taken so this was $200,000. This is a $220,000 project between these two greenhouses. And so most farmers, most farmers, small scale farmers, are they really going to take on that burden? Even though it will completely pay back, do they have that kind of they want to take that kind of risk, especially if like land is a little tenuous, you have to have rock solid land, like either you own it or you have a really long-term lease. But just like this tunnel, these tunnels compared to that tunnel, so that is a 20 by 120. I have temperature sensors in all of these, so during the winter I'm actually very closely monitoring what's going on. We have a controller that's actually hooked up to the internet, so I can monitor stuff. But I also have a cellular system that monitors temperatures in my coolers, and it's a company called Monit. So for a while I was putting temperature sensors in there. I didn't do it last winter but basically that tunnel would go from whatever the ambient temperature was at the middle of the night, but whatever the lowest temperature is, say it's like 20, and then it would shoot all the way up to like 80 or 90 in a day. So like these tunnels, because we have the ridge vents, our low was 33, so we'd never let it go below 33, and then at 55 it would vent during the winter. So we never had temperature swings, and I mean, in terms of the quality, it's like night and day. But that's because we were trying to grow lettuces. If you had spinach.
But this still gives you more flexibility in terms of looking at, again, even under low tunnel situations, or even trying to pick the few crops that you can overwinter in low tunnels and harvest continuously throughout that season. There are real serious pathogen concerns that come along with that. And one of the primary drivers of that is high relative humidity, which going into the winter is almost impossible to get a situation where you're below 100%.
Yeah.
But in a situation like this, you do have some options. Even heating and drying out the air with that heater helps bring that down a little bit. Yeah. The ridge vent, end wall vents. I mean, you have a lot of flexibility there to try to more carefully hone that environment, which is the entire idea behind controlled environment agriculture, is to actually control that environment. But it does come at the cost of a very huge upfront capital investment. I think there's room for both systems, absolutely, especially looking at things like spinach. If you have a good rotation set up, even some kale, some of the things that are winter hardier to overwinter in low tunnels in the field, maybe alongside a system like this where you can really focus on those higher value crops that respond better to.
Yeah, I like having this tunnel actually as part of the rotation, because the way we used it was we planted Salanova in it early season. Well, that was the first that we would harvest. So we harvested it, got a nice cut out of it, but I never planned on overwintering it in there. So I planned that to be done by like early December, and it was fine. We actually got a lot of powdery mildew in it, which was unfortunate, but it's not heated, no. Although I just recently got electricity into it, so we do have, these are called HAF fans. They're like they're horizontal flow fans. Although I will say, I just went to a workshop at Stone Barns, and there was this this sales guy, high tunnel expert from Nexus, who has been working for the company for like 30-something years. I mean, he really knows his stuff. And he was saying, from his perspective, he would never recommend a passively vented greenhouse for an organic grower. He would always recommend a motorized, a power vented with insect netting. So basically, you can put insect netting, insect screen up on all the openings of your greenhouse to not really let anything in. And also, if we add a lot, I'll talk about this in just 2 seconds, but we add a lot of beneficials to our high tunnels. So it also keeps the beneficials in. But the problem with a vented system, the problem with having screen, so we could put screen, I actually bought it, insect screening on our sides. The problem is it really cuts down airflow. So you need, I think it's something like, so usually when you see these systems, they'll have a sort of like a tent off the sides, and they'll have these fans across the side. So you actually need 5 times the amount. So you need 5 times the venting with screens. So basically, how do I describe that? You basically just have these giant vents. So you have the giant screens that are like the whole side, and then you have these power vents that go through. So it cuts down the airflow that much that it's like you need 5 times more airflow basically in order to maintain temperature. And temperature management, just like humidity, so most tomato blossoms will abort at 85 degrees. So you really want to keep that temperature down if you're growing tomatoes. So I don't know. I think there's something to be said about that. Having more insect screening and having power, but then you're using more electricity. I like the passive ventilation, but I mean I understand what he's saying. It's like you have so much money invested in these things and in the crop, and then you're just letting it kind of open to chance when, like, you have to be so on your game with high tunnels because it's such an unnatural environment. I just think you have to be like, not just like soil, nutrient management, but water management, insect and disease. You have to be scouting very regularly. Do you notice how we have these bean plants planted?
Yeah.
So the bean plants are actually to monitor spider mites, because last year we had an outbreak of spider mites in that tunnel. It may be because I had my strawberries here, and strawberries and spider mites are kind of a thing. But spider mites love beans before they love anything else. So we've just been planting these bean plants throughout the greenhouse, and then we work with IPM Labs, and we were inoculating with beneficials, like especially also hitting the bean plants, just in case there were spider mites on the bean plants. They would kind of get established because a lot of the beneficial need food in order to, develop. So.
One question just about the smaller, I'm looking at getting something that would be a little less than this. And the one that we had was a little less than this, but it happened to be pretty tall. It was about 20 feet tall, which was just tall enough that we actually, we just didn't have a tall enough ladder, and when we were putting it up, we had to go and hire a lift. It was a pain. And so I look at that and I think, wow, that seems really doable if you're just constructing it yourself with your crew's labor. I wonder if you have any thoughts. Obviously, that is just nowhere near as well ventilated as this.
Yeah.
Do you think that there would be a significant difference if you're going with something that minimal, though?
Huge.
Like not with ridge vents or anything, just the same style, but just 10 feet taller?
Yeah, huge.
Think
Yeah.
it'd be way better?
Even if you did something like that, I would still put extended ground posts on it just to get it higher. Although your situation, you just had that hurricane situation, so.
Yeah, but, okay, so you think it's a huge difference if it were just a few feet taller?
If you plan to grow in tomatoes, I mean, if you're growing lettuce and it's going to be like that tall, but yeah, I mean, the difference in temperature between head height and like 15 feet up in this thing is like huge. Even with the ridge vent. So, that reminds me, I need to raise up my temperature sensor. That's a good thing to remember. It's really low right now. So look, the little bird's about to fly in there, a little jerk. He's gonna poop on everything. So anyway, I did want to talk a little bit about this trellising system. This is a company out of
the Netherlands,
I think, right? It's called Qlipper, Qlipr. I don't know what the heck it stands for. It's the worst. I mean, if they're gonna like brand and market it in the United States, they should probably come up with a different name. But I really, really, really like it. So your normal trellising system is you use these little black clips, which I used to have a box in here, but I'm sure you all know the evil black clips. They go around the plant and then they kind of click around the string. And usually the string is held up by either a tomato hook that has string wound around it, or sometimes there's like a little spool that you can hit a thing and it unspools. The reason why I love this system, it was pretty expensive actually. Like I think each wire is like 70 something cents, and each one of these clips I think is like 30 something cents. So it really adds up because we have like 3,000 of these, and each one of these has only two clips. So basically you can kind of see it's a sponge, and we are getting multiple uses out of the sponge. We're just sanitizing them in between. So basically the plant goes in this, and then these little jaws clip around either the string or they clip around the hook. So it's really quick. You can I went with the longer ones. You can get shorter hooks too, but I figured if you're gonna do it, you might as well have them longer. And so one hook always needs to stay at the bottom of this little hook. You see how there's a little like nubby poo here? So they don't actually hold very well onto they slide down with pressure. So you have to have one at the base, and then the other one, that's why it's a 2-clip system. You just kind of do this, and that's it. Just as it grows taller, you just basically move this one clip up. They did say in the video that you kind of take this clip and put this clip up, but we didn't find that to be true.
How do you get them? What do you do with them until they get up to that height?
They have a string.
Okay.
So we do put a string, yeah. And this thing, it does actually hook pretty well into the string. It's a little annoying, but the nice thing about this is that it is so, because we will lower and lean these plants. So they'll get, like I was saying, so the temperature here versus up here is really different. And the flowers will abort at like 85 degrees. You guys, were you worried about a tornado? They will abort if the temperature is really high, especially heirlooms. So these are actually big dennas. These are bred for this environment. And they're amazing. They're such beautiful plants. But so you want to kind of lowering and leaning. So the leaning is actually just moving the wire over a little bit. You start with the edges and you kind of work your way down. And then you can imagine the plant is kind of going a little bit horizontal, and you can just pull it down so it's leaned and lowered. I just think it's really quick because you don't have to use ladders. I hate using ladders in here. When you use a ladder, you got to move it over, get up the ladder, crumb down. In a conventional tomato situation like this, so this is a typical density that would be used in a tomato house. We basically have 2 rows on a bed, and we have a leader every foot. So we actually only have 1 plant down the middle, but the plants are spaced at a foot apart, and there's 2 leaders coming off of them, so it's that same sort of density. So, that's like 3,000 times you got to get up a ladder and get down a ladder and move it. So it's a lot of work. So with this, you can do it pretty much all from the ground. So you just move it over and you just drop it down. And then at the end of the season, it's so easy because all you do is remove the clips and the plants just plop. And then you can just, you can throw the tomatoes in your compost, or just find a big hole and bury them.